welcome, Farewell fans. It is your host, MNG, and I am here with another great interview because I like to bring you the best of best interviews because we're all trying to grow together. We're all trying to have something to contribute to the world. So today I have Jason Brick with me here today, and we have a great subject. Now, Jason, you reached out to me over IG, and one thing I want to say is I appreciate you reaching out. I only get so many requests over IG, so when I do get them, I take them as I can. But you came to me with a idea and a concept that I think more men should know about. Even mothers should know about this and have this core conversation with their daughters. And before we jump into that, can you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. I'm Jason Brick. I'm the host of the podcast, Safest Family on the Block. And I've written a book by that name that's coming out May 8th, which I think is the day this drops. And I got there through a kind of weird way. Our lives always end up weird. I spent the first half of my adult life in the martial arts and personal security sphere. I competed, I traveled, I worked as a bodyguard and a bouncer a little bit. And then I had my kids, and my oldest kid's first year of school was when it really came home that running a martial arts school is an evenings and weekends job.
Okay.
So that meant I didn't see my kid nearly as much as I wanted to. I wasn't able to be the dad I wanted to. And so I transitioned into a career in journalism and freelance writing. Did that for about 10 years. And then I had one of those COVID seizures, I like to call it.
Okay.
And shifted into this project, Safest Family on the Block, where I interview subject matter experts about keeping our families safe. Okay. And one thing, if you look up family safety on the web, on YouTube or whatever, you're going to get a lot of advice about crime prevention, which we're talking about today.
Yeah.
But on my show, crime prevention is a very small part of family safety. So I'll have a cop on to talk about crime, but then I'll have a firefighter on to talk about fire safety. Next week, it's a nutritionist. The week after that is a suicide counselor. The week after that is a driving instructor. Wanted to get all of those pieces of keeping our family safe that I could find.
Okay.
And the topic we're coming on to today is one of the biggest surprises for me.
I agree. So now, how long have you been, just a little bit more background, how long have you been doing your podcast?
Podcast started in late 2020, so I guess 5 years.
Oh, man, how has the run been going?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
How's it been going, like having to keep up with it for 5 years?
Took a year off last year.
Okay.
Just starting to back up again. But it's been going well. The numbers aren't where I'd love them to be. The money is certainly not where I'd love it to be, but The knowledge is immense. These people that are coming on, sharing hard-won experience. And one thing that I've noticed is some of the baddest asses on the planet are some of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. The people are so giving and so friendly,
Hey, I agree. Okay, so let's jump into it. I wanted to know because we've just completed our first year, and there's some things that happen behind the podcast scenes that everybody don't get privy to see, but that's another tale for another day. So let me ask you this: so on the subject matter that we're talking about, it said, why do we spend so much effort teaching young women about stranger danger, self-defense, yet relatively little teaching them to spot the warning signs and potential partners, especially when you indicate the risk from partners is vastly high?
Yeah, and that's a huge question. It's a big misconception our society has. And I think it starts with not just, teaching our young women, our daughters, our nieces, our friends' daughters, whoever, about risks to them, but for all kids, we teach stranger danger,
right?
Which is nonsense. The overwhelming majority of violence to everybody, to kids and women, comes from people they know.
Yes.
But we send our daughter off to college, and we buy them a thing of pepper spray for their purse, maybe a rape whistle.
Yeah.
But we don't talk to them about domestic violence and how to spot an abuser and how to get out of a relationship if they start looking like it might go that way. It's hugely important. I think there's 3 parts of why we don't do that. And I got some notes right here. And the first one is we tend as a society to think about violence as coming from strangers.
Right.
It's just kind of the picture we have of violence. It's also easier to talk about. It is much easier to take your kids out to the range when they're 15, 16 than it is to sit down and talk about domestic abuse and talk about that relationship that your aunt had. That's a
Right.
harder, scarier conversation without clear solutions.
It is. It is.
Yeah. And then the third one, and I think this is something that's all of our responsibility, and it's kind of a hangover. Our society and our culture has thought that violence towards women, especially domestic violence towards women, is kind of okay for much longer than we've known it wasn't. I mean, for example, the first state to make it legally possible for a husband to rape a wife, before that it wasn't rape, it was just you get to do what you want because you're the husband. That happened in 1975.
You're right about that.
Yeah, I'd like you to guess what year it was that the 50th state made that illegal.
I'm gonna say somewhere in the 1990s.
Exactly, 1993, North Carolina.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's how much momentum and weight behind the not taking domestic violence seriously exists in our society.
So let me throw something in there. So
Yeah.
when you talk about that, right?
Mhm.
Would you think, from a historical purpose, would you think that it had something to do with the mixture of state and religion?
That's a good question.
And the,
Yeah.
the reason why I say
Yeah.
that because there are religious scriptures and principles that are out there that man is head of the household, and the woman is a supporting, but she is a subset of the man. So that gives man reign to do whatever he wants to his wife in any regard. That is separate from state.
Yeah.
There's more of a religious principle of the woman being subservient to the man. Would you think that played a role in it at prior to those rulings coming out?
I don't know. What I'd have to do is I'd have to look at societies that don't have the Judeo-Christian Bibles, which are usually the ones that have that schema, that structure of women and children being the property of the man.
Yes.
And look at domestic violence in, say, Buddhist countries, which don't have that so much, or some of the Hindu countries, or countries that are now more atheistic, and see what the domestic violence numbers look like there.
Right.
And that, because I don't know, but that's a way we could find out. We could take a look at those and maybe see if the numbers have changed as countries that were strongly Christian, like most of the European countries, especially Northern European countries, they were enthusiastically Christian up until the 20th century, but have kind of shifted over into more of an agnostic viewpoint now, and see if the domestic violence numbers have changed there. It's an interesting question, and definitely a challenge, I think, for the faithful about, there's a lot of verses in the Bible that can excuse really bad behavior.
It does.
If you want them to.
It does. And as we know, certain behaviors are trained, are learned from previous generations, right?
Yeah.
So if we understand that these behaviors are trained or learned, I wouldn't say inherited, but these are learned and trained behaviors as they proceed forward, then it has to come from some core understanding that this is okay or was okay, and it's still in some regard okay to an extent, because the person obviously thinks that it's okay, whether is them trying to control their emotion, or is there a belief system that is there that makes them think that women are subservient and can be abused or beat on to get their point across. But go ahead to your other point. I want to.
No, that's the third one that I think that hangover. I mean, how many generations does it take for an idea to go from this is okay to it's a little bit okay to it's not okay? And I think that cultural wide, I think we're in between. It's a little bit okay and it's not okay, at least at a subconscious level for a lot of people. And I don't think our culture takes domestic violence as seriously as they take violence from a stranger.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, if on the other end of that, because I have been a victim of abuse, and I have learned that there have been victims of abuse towards women in my family.
Yeah.
So my question is from the other point of view of, even though a woman has not been abused and is not part of that religious aspect, you know, the fear to stay and the fear to seek help. Neither that is learned or taught, but it happens.
Yeah.
You know, there are some that, and I'm pretty sure in your experience, some of them have gone through it multiple times before saying, I'm ready to leave.
Yeah.
Enough is enough. And I guess I'm always wondering the conversation or the process after the first one, before is, because the first one should be, I would think that the first one is enough to say, this is not how I want to live.
Yeah.
I want to go. I want to leave.
Well, I think that coming back to it, the forgiving him, that coming back, the moving out at the first time he hit you, but coming back 2 weeks later, I think it is learned and taught. I think that they learn it from seeing how that one aunt dealt with that, or seeing how their fathers and brothers and uncles talk about domestic violence, or from, there's a lot of TV shows and movies where that's the model that's taught. And at a deeper level, are we as fathers, as uncles, I only have 2 boys, so I don't have a daughter of my own, but I've got plenty of nieces out there that I care about. But are we teaching them that they are worth not being hit? Are we hitting them and when they're children, teaching them that men who love us hit it, right? There's a lot of behaviors besides that decision in that moment to leave or go that we do teach them every day.
That's a good point. Is discipline, and it goes for boys and girls, is discipline, does it have a adverse effect as they get older? Does discipline boys, and there's been plenty of research that either debunks it or supports it. No, discipline keeps them on the right track. Discipline takes them on discipline puts them on the wrong track. There's a lot of different variables that go into there. And just like yourself, I only have my son, but I have a sister. I have some cousins that I love, and I have not had that conversation with them to say, no, a man should not put their hands on you. No, you need to look for this in a relationship, because for my sister, her dad wasn't there, and I wasn't there during the time that she was growing up. We're 12 years apart, so it's such a huge gap in time. So then when we do hang out, and I see the guys that she talked to, and even for some of my cousins, I see the guys they talk to, and it's like, what does dude try to put his hands on her, and then how do you get in front of it?
Yeah.
While they're dating, and then on the back end of it, how do you comfort them so it doesn't, and strengthen them so it doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
Because after something like that happens, and this is a person that's coming from abuse, there is a broken spirit. There is a mental aspect that goes into it. There is an emotional aspect goes into it. There is a depression that goes into it. There's a lot of things happening in the aftermath of abuse that makes a person that want to give up, that doesn't have something tangible, intangible to hold on to, unless it's a kid or something like that.
Absolutely. There's also, for a lot of more modern women, I guess you'd say, there's embarrassment. that
Yes.
they, and are they going to come to you and admit this mistake that they made by dating this guy who would hit her? And
Right.
all these pieces, there's all these ways that they could talk themselves into staying in the relationship, in not seeking help and advice until it's gone on quite a while.
Right.
And those conversations, having those conversations early and often about how much you value them, about how much you'll support them. One thing that I think is hugely important as parents is, and you seem to be about my age, so you and I were probably both raised the same way, where if we got in trouble at school or we screwed up, we got home, we knocked on the door, Dad got home, our day just got a lot worse.
It did.
It did so much worse. And as a result of that, there were times that we could have really used our dad's advice. Maybe we didn't go to him because we were afraid they were going to make our day worse.
Right.
Where instead you get a call from the principal because your kid screwed up. They come through that door. What they get is a hug and a sit down and, okay, looks like you did not act your best today, but I'm not going to make your day worse. The world's going to punish you enough. I'm here to talk to you and help you meet those consequences with grace and maturity, but I'm not going to throw on extra bonus consequences just on account of because.
Right.
I'm here to help you with your challenges, even when those challenges are the result of you making a mistake.
Now, I'll be the one to tell you, because I was raised by my grandmother.
Yeah.
It wasn't a conversation when I got to the door.
No. No, it was not.
It was, you see that bush right there?
Yep.
Go get a switch.
Yeah.
And it was definitely in an era where you didn't just get disciplined by your parents. You had discipline by, if you was raised in a neighborhood where all the families knew each other, that was the only person that disciplined. You got a talking to down there. It was a phone call. Then you get down there. Then you got another talking to, and maybe a ring. Why when you got home? So it was the definition, and that was a prime definition of community.
Yeah,
because it was making sure that all the kids were raised correctly by working together.
Yeah,
to prevent.
Yeah, and there were real advantages to that, but also in that community where if you make a mistake, all the adults who know you are gonna pile on.
Yeah,
and you're thinking maybe I made a mistake dating this guy who none of them liked anyway. How likely are you to come ask any of those adults for help and advice about whether it was a mistake?
Right.
And so making sure that although, the community gets together and helps to raise the kids up, leading with that love and compassion and, I am on your side. Even if you screwed up, I'm not going to go to the principal and yell at them for getting you in trouble because, dude, you screwed up and you deserve to be in trouble at school. Yes. But I'll walk there with you if you need you to and stand there next to you and take the dressing down too because I'm the one that raised this idiot, right? And all of that. But making sure that you are their go-to, that when your kids are adults, that if they got trouble, you're the one they call at 2 a.m. because they trust you to make the bad days better, not make the bad days worse. And if you start there, these conversations when they're getting in relationships that might become abusive, they're going to go better for everybody. Well, except for the guy.
Yeah, definitely not going to be good for him.
Yeah.
But and one thing I want to say to that is, before we move on, is that you're absolutely correct. It starts with that communication.
Yeah.
If you do not have, and I don't want to say open communication. If you don't have that honest, you can come to me conversation.
Yeah.
Without yelling. And I think that's where some parents go wrong is because they yell at their kids and it shuts down the lines of communication because they feel like they're going to get yelled at about everything.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say open communication because a lot of people say open communication and everybody's perspective on open communication is different.
Yeah.
You have to have a honest conversation with your child as they're being raised to say, you can come to me about anything and we can talk about it in a calm manner so they can feel comfortable and safe with having the conversation. When you take that away, then you start to get that breakdown in communication because they tell you certain things but don't tell you other things.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my first martial arts teachers used to say, anger is fear dressed up for Halloween. When you want to yell at your kid, It's because you're scared. And so it can take us a minute to kind of sit back and think, okay, I want to yell at them right now. What am I afraid of? They got a bad report card. We're afraid that they're going to drop out of school and end up homeless or just living in our basement in their 40s. They come home late from after curfew without giving a call. We're scared that they're on the side of the road. Right? All those things that if we're tempted to yell, it's because they've scared us. And sometimes we need to take 5 minutes and say, you know what, we're going to talk about this in a bit because I'm so angry right now. I'm so scared right now that I can't speak to you with the respect that you deserve. And then come back later and you can make that conversation about, I was so angry because I was scared of this. I was worried about that. And that creates an honesty and shows a vulnerability and also models how somebody who loves you acts when they're angry. So that if they are in that relationship and that partner's yelling at them or punching through the drywall or whatever, they're going, hey, wait, no, that's not how I'm treated.
Yeah. You're hitting the nail on the head. Now, you mentioned a potential 99-to-1 ratio for harm from known individuals versus strangers. Now, what is the basis for that statistic, and why isn't it the reality reflected in mainstream safety advice?
Those are really good questions, and that 99-to-1 is an estimate. The numbers from the United States Department of Justice and from the World Health Organization say that about 70% of violence against women is from someone they know. 80% of rapes of women are from somebody they know. A little more than half of all violence against women is domestic violence. And that's reports. And then numbers like 95, 96, 98, those come from extrapolating out of the fact that much violence goes unreported, and violence from a domestic partner goes unreported far more than violence from a stranger. So that's where those numbers come from. And I think why, honestly, I'm going to get real cynical for a second. People make their living teaching self-defense. And it's a lot easier to sell how it feels to get a good workout in and beat the hell out of a heavy bag or somebody in a red man suit. Right? That feels good. It feels empowering. It's something that somebody will come back for. But that conversation about the realities of domestic violence, that just leaves you feeling icky. Both because of what it says about the world, what it says about dating, and the solutions. They're not clean and fun. You don't see Bruce Lee up there on screen handing the key back to his domestic partner and packing up some bags and walking across the street. You see him getting in there and laying down the smack. And so it's not an attractive item to sell, so fewer people try to sell it. There are some people working really powerfully in that right now. Let's see here. Kelly Sayre, who wrote, what's it called? Sharp Women. Tasia Van Wicklen, who's got a book coming out very soon. Rory Miller. Those are 3 authors who are addressing this very, very well. Okay. But for the most part, it doesn't sell.
So you remember in 90s, by late 90s, early 2000, they talked about women watching their drinks.
Yeah.
Because of date rape drugs. Yeah. Right? And some you had mentioned, you were saying that, it's just not something that sells, right?
Yeah.
Because it's easier for somebody to feel weak, to be a victim, and sell them on self-defense and let out that aggression and rebuilding them, right?
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of TV, okay? Because now we have all these streaming services. We don't have much commercials, okay?
Yeah.
Can you recall seeing a commercial warning women of date rape drugs, warning them of getting into Ubers with, rape or sexual assault that's happening during that time? Because those have happened too. Sexual assaults haven't happened with women getting inside of Ubers or being taken to remote locations or whatever the case is, right? Have you seen safety vehicles? Well, I mean, public safety commercials, PSAs, or whatever you want to call them, in regards to women keeping their safety and protection of themselves while going into either isolated or secluded situations, Uber, Lyft, whatever, or going into bars and something getting put into their drink. And why are these mechanisms have to be taught in from woman to woman, but it's not a massive conversation talking about this like it was in the 90s. Like in the 90s, there was an agenda to talk about public safety. We are in the 2020s. There's no public agenda that is talking about safety.
Not really. There isn't. But there are some pretty good YouTube channels out there. There's a guy, I can't remember his name off the top, but he just kept making TikToks, rather, of taking Swedish fish, the little candy Swedish fish?
Yeah.
And dropping it in girls' drinks at bars, just to show how quick and easy it is.
Wow.
And just like, did you see me do that? And then sometimes one even interviewer will just like do it on camera, then walk away just to show how easy. And sometimes he'll engage about, hey, I wish I could remember his name. I do this as a safety thing. Did you see me put that Swedish fish in your drink? Here, let me buy you a new drink. Right? So there's some people working on TikTok, on Instagram Reels and stuff like that. But yeah, I agree. It's not being served, or at least not being served well, in the classic streams of information that you and I grew up with before the internet made everything strange.
Right. I just find it weird that any public safety, even kids.
Yeah.
You still have kids that walk to the bus stop.
Mm-hmm.
You still got kids that walk home. And I don't even see, stranger danger still being put out there or anything. Even when they were talking about, forest fires and making sure that you watch fire. I rarely or don't see that.
Yeah.
Pharaoh fans, y'all gotta let me know. Do y'all see these things? Because I don't watch a lot of TV, but when I do watch TV that has commercials, I don't see those things come up. And
it's part of a lot of the sex ed curriculum right now. Most of them do have a section on safety when you go out in the world and things like that. But of course, that becomes a political football because it's hard to get that kind of stuff put through a lot of schools, and a lot of people opt out. I might argue that the sons and daughters who need that information the most are the ones whose parents are opting out. Unfortunately.
And honestly, I think sex ed is a great class because some parents I know some women that are having the hardest time having that conversation with their sons because they don't want to have a conversation, and guys don't want to have a conversation with their daughters or the parents together. Just they don't want to have the sex ed conversation, which I don't understand. Why do you want to avoid a topic in today's time with so much going on?
Yeah, there's so much risk involved with it. There's so much weirdness about it. And having those conversations and being, like you say, being honest and open. And it's okay, as parents, we can say, you know what? A lot of things about sex are private between the two people who are having sex. So I'm not going to share that information because that's private between me and your mom.
You're right.
But here is some general information about that. And I had a sex education. She'd spent much of her career teaching sex ed and is now more of an advocate and, what's the word? Not a lobbyist, but like that, for sex ed. She had a great idea for people who are a little uncomfortable, which is you go order a full set of pamphlets from Planned Parenthood or some other organization like that does sex education. And you order a 48 pack of condoms and a 48 pack of dental dams off of Amazon. And you just put them in a drawer in the kid's bathroom. And that way he has access to that information in private if they're a little afraid to come talk to you about it. Their friends have access to that information if their parents are maybe dropping the ball on that.
Yeah.
And then they have the tools available to them. And ideally, they will come to us and talk to us about it. But also, this is the real world.
Now,
and that's a resource for them that costs $50.
Yeah.
And is hugely powerful.
Now, I'm gonna tell you what I did with my son. I made the conversation extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Not intentionally,
Mm,
but I had to. I There was no other way to approach the conversation. Like
yeah.
I had to be direct. I didn't want to beat around the bush. I don't care about the birds and the bees. I just needed to have a conversation and be direct about it. Are you doing these things?
Yeah.
Are you engaging in any type of activity sexually?
Mm,
And he was like, no, and I'm like, are you sure? No, but I think it's a conversation that does need to be had,
yeah.
and because I know from I talked to some parents, they have the conversation about uh, make sure you're not touched here, make sure you're not touched there, and everything. But how deep does that conversation really goes,
Yeah.
right? But I know.
It's a tough conversation, and having that conversation, especially about consent, which there are several curriculums in the high school and even middle school that talk about consent really smart.
Right.
My youngest son's last year was actually doing. You've seen the tea video about tea and consent.
I think I have. I think I seen it on YouTube or something like that. I think.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the whole thing about if you offer someone a cup of tea and they don't want tea, don't give them tea. If you make them some tea and then they decide they don't want tea, they don't want tea. Don't give them tea. If they fall asleep or pass out on the couch while you're making tea, don't give them tea. And it's funny, but it's dead on. And it was actually part of his sex ed curriculum, which I thought was fantastic.
Oh, that is amazing. I like that
Yeah,
concept.
yeah.
I like that concept. Now, let me ask you this. Now, what
Mhm.
specifically in your background led you to focus on this gap in safety education concerning relationship dynamics for young people?
Sure thing. And full disclosure, this isn't my main focus, but it is one of my pet peeves in the
Mm,
uh, general category of family safety. And I got there with my oldest son. We adopted at age of 7.
okay.
He was a shirt tail relative, as we like to say, and dad wasn't in the picture. Mom became medically incapable of caring for him,
Okay.
and so it was like, didn't have a kid. 2 weeks later, had a kid. At that
Makes-
time, I was a fourth degree black belt. I've talked about my background a little earlier. I've been doing
Yeah.
martial arts for 20 years. Bouncing, bodyguard, all that stuff. I thought I was a badass, and I had a whole stack of certificates to prove it. And I'm starting to take. And I remember very clearly the weekend before he came to live in my home, I was practicing some gun disarms and teaching some gun disarms, and I noticed how many of them put the gun kind of at hip level behind you,
Mm-hmm.
with the barrel pointing right where a 7-year-old child would probably be standing if someone came at us with a gun.
Right.
Like, hold up, hold on, hold up, hold up, right? And I started going, wow, I know a lot of stuff, and almost none of it's going to help me protect a 7-year-old.
Right.
And so, because I've had very good coaches, one thing they taught me is if there's something you don't know, go find out. And
Right.
so I started to lean into and learn, and the podcast is part of that, asking people who know more than me, which is pretty easy to do about most things, about different topics. And I found just so many holes in what I'd learned and what I knew. And this one in particular, of that we train for crime prevention from strangers,
Right.
is, crime prevention is such a small part of safety, and crime from strangers is such a small part of crime prevention that we need to pay closer attention to that. We need to train our daughters and our sons. Men suffer from domestic abuse too.
Yes.
And we need to teach them about how to date safely, how to be in a relationship safely, how to get out of a relationship safely. One really interesting point that Rory Miller, I mentioned earlier, pointed out is that the process by which somebody selects you from a crowd to be a victim,
Mm-hmm.
they watch you, they make some decisions about how you move and how you look, that tell them that maybe you make a good victim. They find a way to separate you from the crowd and get you alone. They get more than is appropriately close to you. Then they make their move.
Right.
That's identical to what you do if you see somebody at a bar and think you might want to date them. You see them from across the room. You make certain decisions based on their appearance and how they move and talk. You get up there, you stand a little too close to them, you separate them from the crowd, and then you make your move.
Right.
Those processes are identical if you're just looking.
That you're absolutely right.
And so how do we teach somebody to tell the difference?
Mm.
And that's the challenge. And that's one of the biggest places, again, because violence comes from people we know. Whether we're talking about stranger danger and 7-year-olds, the boogeyman we were taught was going to take us away and have us end up on unsolved mysteries because we, didn't carry our flashlight with us on Halloween night. It happens, and it's awful when it happens, but it's vanishingly rare. Whereas that soccer coach, that assistant pastor,
Yeah,
right? But all that stranger danger talk didn't prepare our kids for that at all.
it didn't.
And when you get into high school, teenagers, college students, young adults, that Taekwondo class we had him take, that Krav Maga class we put him in, the range time, all that stuff, that might protect them from someone jumping at him in a parking garage. But how often does that happen? And there are other non-combat skills that can make it happen even less. Versus that boyfriend whose dad hit him, hit his mom. So he thinks hitting people you love is just part of what you do.
Right.
Spotting that person. And so yeah, it's that was how I found that hole. And this is also kind of why I think it's one of the big, most important holes that we have in teaching our kids to be safe.
Now, I want to jump into your book really quick. Yeah. Your book touches on this, specifically guiding parents on what to teach their teen daughters without giving away the whole book. What are some categories of warning signs parents should be equipping their daughters to recognize on dates or early in relationships? Now, one thing I want to say is that when you were talking about man going through abuse and everything. Now I was once dating a young lady, and one night she had what I would call a tantrum tantrum. Okay. And in that tantrum tantrum, while I was trying to leave, I had a basketball bag on me and everything. While I was trying to leave, she was pulling me back into the house. Now, in this situation, for some people or some people, this could get physically violent.
Yeah.
Being pulled back into the house, trying to get away, and somebody would through a fist or anything like that. And I talk about these situations because it was a trigger moment for me because I don't like domestic violence.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a domestic situation with a woman, whether it's me putting hands on them or they're putting hands on me. I don't want to be in a situation where that can occur or happen. And I think some people need to understand that it can happen very quickly.
Yeah.
Like without knowing. You could be the person that's not engaging, but you could be one arguing, and the engagement can happen towards you, and then you reciprocate that same energy.
Yeah.
And I tell the story because I walked away knowing that this situation could have gotten ugly from the gate.
Yeah.
And there is definitely a level of awareness that comes along with that, because you have to recognize where the conversation is going. It's not about being right. Sometimes it's about your own preservation of safety to know when to walk away.
Mm.
But I digress.
No, I agree absolutely, and that's violence against men in relationships is really complicated because this woman grabbed you, and if a guy had grabbed you aggressively while you're trying to go away, you would have turned around and necked him.
Right.
Probably. But the reality is that men have larger muscle mass, more testosterone, more bone density, and most men have been in more tussles just because of the way, especially men our age, were taught to play as boys.
Yeah.
And so there's, it's a little bit sexist, but life is a little bit sexist. That we shouldn't hit back unless we fear we're in danger. There was a time that I dated a woman who was a regionally competitive kickboxer, and we never had any violence between her, but she probably could have taken me.
Uh-huh.
right? So,
Yeah.
but that's another factor. And also, there are some women who feel like they can smack you, the little pop on the arm,
Yeah.
because you're bigger and stronger and they can't hurt you. And I was in a couple of unhealthy relationships because of my background and training where they really thought it was okay to hit me. I was paying $150 a month to go get hit by other people.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, it's complex. And then of course there's the even more shame and embarrassment, like for a man to admit to his dad and to his friends, yeah, my wife's beating me up. There's so many comedy routines about that out there. It's like we're chuckling now. But yeah, the domestic violence against men does happen. And most of the things that we're talking about with women also work for men.
Yeah.
And they'll also work for our teenage boys.
Yeah.
And you're talking about some categories. And the biggest one, the most important one, is respecting boundaries. One of the best pieces of advice we can give to our daughters is on a first date, make up something. Say, you know what? I'll meet you at 5. I absolutely have to go at 7.
Yeah.
Or, I'm not going to have any alcohol if they're older, or I don't want to go to Chinese. I don't want to go to Mexican, or whatever, right?
All right.
Just some boundary that doesn't even matter to them, and then see what they do about it. If they say, okay, 100%, I respect that. Absolutely. I'll have you done by 6:30. Or, oh, you don't like Mexican? That's fine. I like Mexican, but let's go for sandwiches or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then later on, especially that hard out time limit. If you say you're out at 6:30 and at 6:15, he's saying, well, we better get the check. I want to make sure to get you home on time. Right. Mm-hmm. Or whether they're, hey, why don't you stay a little longer? It's okay.
Right.
This is a first date.
Right.
This is when they're going to be on their very best behavior of the entire relationship. And if they're not respecting her boundaries then, they're not going to respect her boundaries later.
I like that.
And so it's a big category, and it's a easy self-defense technique, if you will, for first dates.
I like it.
The next one to watch out is, how do they handle power and disappointment?
Okay.
How do they treat their little brothers? How do they treat the waiter at the restaurant? How do they treat their elders?
Those small things.
Yeah, you look at those, because if they bully those people, they're going to bully her. Okay. And the thing that we can do as dads, especially if we get to know months, if our daughter is dating an athlete, you go to every game and you watch how they act when they lose.
Okay.
How do they handle disappointment under pressure?
Frustration.
Right. And I mean, it's natural to be frustrated, but you can see the reality of a young man in how they handle that frustration. Mm-hmm. If they throw a fit and come running at the ref, or they throw their helmet down, or if they just kind of, okay, whatever it is. Right. Whatever it is. But that'll tell you a lot. How they behave when they're frustrated in competition will tell you a whole lot about how they behave when they're frustrated by your daughter behaving the exact same way that frustrates you.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And then finally, how do they treat you? What's your gut after talking to them for a little bit? Are they, because they're going to be putting on a bit of an act, but they're young enough that we can usually see through the act. Yeah. How do they treat you? How do they treat your wife? And a topic on there is, again, we were raised to as dads, we're supposed to scare the people who date our daughters. Kind of that threat. There was a time I went out on a first date with a woman, her dad showed me his knife and gun collection. That's kind of an impulse we have. It's a trope, right?
Yeah.
But if we scare him, he's now our adversary.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Ideally, he'd come to us for advice.
Okay.
And so making sure that we treat him with that. And those are some things to look for in a man, a young woman we care about wants to date. Mm-hmm. Another category of things to look for is in her. And the big thing you want to look for is change. Now, everybody changes every time they get in a relationship, and sometimes it's good, right? Your daughter's listening to Boyz II Men and NSYNC 24/7, but then she dates a drummer, and next thing you know, it's Iron Maiden and Body Count all day long, all day strong, and you couldn't be happier, right? But is she in getting joy out of the things she used to get joy out of? Is she talking less? Is she more anxious? Does her eating change? Does she start, when you see her coming out of the bathroom looking in the mirror, does she seem to be harsher on herself than she was? Those changes to how she's acting, how she's feeling, how she's communicating, those can be early warning signs that this might not be as healthy as she thinks it is.
That's good. That's good. I think all those things, because I would have never thought about looking at the small things that a person does and how they treat somebody. Because let's be honest, for the first few months, people can not hide. They deliberately or subconsciously don't let you see who they are at the gate.
They're on their best behavior.
They're on their best behavior. So, but if you pay attention to like the little small details, and don't get me wrong, there's some great actors out there.
Yeah.
But it's not a lot of them.
No.
It's not a lot of them. Asking, how their relation. I know one of the best questions is, how's the relationship with your mom, or just seeing how their relationship is with their parents, regardless of what happened with their parents. What is your relationship? I understand what the relationship was then. Are you trying to make up for that now? Have you forgiven? How do you forgive? Certain like little things like that. Like some people, they're mad at their parents and just mad at their parents forever.
Yeah.
And can't have a decent relationship. Is because all of that kind of circles each other. Because that's how you build your first relationships with your parents.
I agree. And just those little things. And it's interesting that change, it's a theme across almost every safety thing. Like one of the good examples is, you walk into a bar and it's quiet. It doesn't tell you anything about how safe it is. You walk into a bar and it's loud. Doesn't tell you anything about how safe it is. You're sitting in a loud bar that suddenly gets quiet. It's time to pay attention.
Yeah.
You walk into a bar that's usually quiet, but it's really loud. It's probably time to go back to your car. And so many aspects of safety, your first hint is just change and difference.
Yeah.
And so watching that, watching him for those changes when they're under pressure, where they might let the mask fall a little bit, maybe, that's why I think watching, if your daughter's dating somebody who's involved in sports, go into their games, because they're not going to remember that you're there when they miss the pass or they get taken down in wrestling or they get struck out or what have you. Yeah. And so you're going to be able to observe them in their native habitat, as it were, and see what's happening. And if they don't do sports, there are other activities they like to do that you'll be able to see. And also you're showing up for them so that long term, if this is the one and they end up marrying your daughter, you've got that relationship locked down. You've had it from so early, and you've taught them the proper way to treat your grandkids. Yeah. Yeah. And if it doesn't work out and they break up, then you have more things to make fun of them about while she's going through it.
and it's a good vetting process to vet out the ones that are not compatible. Yeah. Because you may not know it. You may not know up front. And you got to have a vetting process. Like, exactly. You have to. So, knowing all of that and looking for the negative traits and just trying to figure out the type of individual that you're dealing with, looking for the signs, what would you say is the most important trait or behavior you advise parents to teach your daughters to look for as a positive sign of potential partner? Now, I know there are parents or, their kids, like, we're not looking to my parents. I look for somebody that's like my mom. I look for somebody that's like my dad. And, us as parents, we show our kids what we want them to see. They don't see all of us. No, they don't see the stuff. They don't see how we handle things at work. They don't see how we handle bills. They don't see how we handle money. There's a lot of areas that kids are hidden from. Like, my mom hid a lot of stuff from me that I didn't find out until I was an adult, and I was just kind of shocked. Because I'm like, okay, well, how did all that other stuff happen and you're going through all of this? Or you did all of this, but you were still able to do this. You shouldn't be able to do this if you did this previously. And it didn't make sense. or you tend to start to find out things about other family members, or just whatever the case. But there are certain things that I didn't see of my parents until I started to get older, which would have been a great a great information to have, but I wasn't ready as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally understand that. Yeah, we got a little digression in my family. We have the three brothers that we grew up with, and there were a few years where we were dead ass broke, just absolutely not two dimes to rub together. And I was old enough to understand what was going on, but also old enough to understand the solutions my parents found.
Okay.
The middle brother was old enough to understand the stress, but not old enough to understand the solutions.
Okay.
And my youngest brother he was born after my dad got the big promotion and we were doing okay. So, I make money, I spend money, I find solutions. My middle brother he makes a ton of money and saves all of it.
Okay.
And then my youngest brother, for him, money is this thing other people worry about. But just the different kinds of connection and what we can observe and understand as we watch our parents. That's hugely important. And I think that's one of the big things to do. We'd asked about things to look for in other people. But first, things to look for in ourselves. How do we treat our partner? I mean, if you're married to your kids, to your kids' other parent, great. If you're in a relationship with somebody else, great. If you're on your own, find the aunts and the best friends, girlfriend or wife, right? That you can model with. How do you treat them in conflict? How do you argue? The kids go to bed at night and then it's just from the other room. Do you model those behaviors about, hey, you know what? I'm too mad to talk to you the way you deserve to be talked to right now. I'm going to take a walk and we'll get back to this in an hour. Is that okay? Things like that. Are we modeling that? Are we showing them that is how somebody who loves somebody else treats them? Are we treating our kids like we talked about earlier? Are we treating them like we want them to be treated when they're alone in a house with somebody they're in a relationship with? And that kind of modeling in ourselves. And it's a hard ask because nobody can get on your nerves more than your spouse and your kids.
That's true.
But having that and expecting that of yourself in those moments and showing them that is how a man acts, even under pressure. And then in the other person, having them look for, again, that thing about boundaries with those test questions. Yeah. Do they respect your boundaries? Do they respect no and stop? And you want to set it up so they're asked no before it's the big no or the big yes or the big maybe or wherever that gets to, because we want our kids to go have successful relationships and really great sex with somebody they love, right? We want that for them. We don't, we want them to have good toe curling because they want to have a good life. And that's part of a good life. But testing, yes, testing, no, testing, stop, testing, not right now. Any kind of test you can do early on that. And it feels a little manipulative, but you know what? So is putting on cologne before you go out on a date.
And right? That's shower in like 2 days.
You know, and so that. And then having that, those are the things to look for, that respect, that listening to boundaries. And then the other part of that question is where to ask them. This is the other piece of, I hate giving advice because it sounds like I'm like, but yeah, the best piece of advice I've gotten that I agree with is where you ask them is at your dinner table. I mean, the statistics and the research out there are just incontrovertible. Family dinner is really good for our kids. It helps them do better job interviews, helps them get better grades, helps with anxiety, reduces suicide. It's just really good to sit down as a family as often as you can and have dinner together. And then that guy wants to be her boyfriend. He is coming to dinner. That's a non-negotiable. So he sits there and you watch him. You watch how he treats her little brother. Yeah. You watch to see if he eats all the food. And sometimes that means he's not getting fed at home. And sometimes that means he's just kind of a jerk. And again, kind of like with going to his ball games or to see him in a play or whatever, if it works out long term, you're showing him the right way to raise your grandkids.
Right.
And if it doesn't work out, you got ammo to make fun of him with, which I said earlier, but it's true here too. But yeah, you look for those things, especially that boundaries, and especially whether or not they're bullies and how they handle frustration. And you look for it at your dinner table, because that young man coming to dinner is a non-negotiable condition
It is.
of
It
our
is.
daughters going out with people.
I agree. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for coming on to the episode. This has been a lot of fun. This is some things that I have not thought about. I don't have a daughter, but again, this is some things that I would talk to my son about, tell my son about, and have those conversations and take this into conversations with him. Is there one more thing, anything else that you want to share with the Farewell fans?
No, just thank you so much for having me on. The book is out. It's called Safest Family on the Block. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. It's over at bookshop.org. Come find me at safestfamilyontheblock.org, or go find Jason Brick on Facebook. There's like 6 or 7 of us, but I'm the only one who talks about martial arts, tabletop role-playing games, and heavy metal every day. So that's me.
All right, Farewell fans, we will catch y'all and go next go around. Make sure y'all tune in for the next episode that we have in place. We'll see y'all again. Peace.
Thank you so much.